Michael, thank you for that introduction, and ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to be here. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Last time I appeared on a kleeneze stage, it was a far smaller audience, and this is absolutely great. I'm going to, at Jamie's suggestion, cover very briefly in this short talk three things. First of all, a bit of history, because we all know that kleeneze is the oldest direct selling company in the UK. But there's also something else which some other people or somebody here may not recognise. You have another first in something else. I will explain in a minute. I'm also going to say a word about, Patrick said something about the state of the economy, and I will mention a word about how I see the current state of play for direct selling companies in this country, and then finally close off with a couple of words of advice. Now, we, in running a business, always ought to look to the future. Let's not dwell too much on the successes of the past. But every now and again, it's nice to indulge and have a look back at what the achievements of you and your predecessors were. And I first became involved in direct selling, and indeed my first acquaintance with kleeneze was at a time when I imagine half of you weren't yet born. This was in 1969. And I was a management consultant brought in by kleeneze PLC, which was a group of companies founded on the original kleeneze business in Bristol. And its share price was going down, and the banks and the board and the owners wanted to know what to do. At that time, Harry Crook, the founder of this business, was still around, and the business was being conducted in exactly the same way as it was when he set it up in 1923. So it was small wonder that there was a need for a little bit of change. Anyway, I looked at the way in which the business was being run. Initially they thought, because we employed something like 500 people in Bristol at that time, that it might have been a manufacturing problem. But it certainly wasn't. Anyway, having decided what the company ought to do as a good management consultant, I said, well, this is what I suggest you do. And then they said, well, look, why don't you join the company as managing director and put it into place? Well, I knew nothing about direct selling, but it seemed like an interesting challenge, and that's what I did. And the first thing I did in a traditional company like this, I took a couple of weeks off, took a suitcase of brushes, and I went around the streets in various towns around the country to find out exactly what it was like. And I learned four things. First, kleeneze had it did then, and it still does now, an absolutely terrific name. Complete customer trust in the brand name. Second, the products that were being sold, again, just as today, they're essential household products which no one can do without. There will always be a demand for them. Thirdly, I found that actually not all the selling was rather good fun. And on many occasions I found it was more difficult getting out of houses than into them. And I certainly enjoyed myself and didn't do too badly. But the final conclusion I came to was that this was no way to run a business in the 1970s. Hardly any households were at home, and it was no good as a full-time occupation, because that's how the business was set up. Clearly, it had to have an emphasis to giving people part-time, flexible earnings opportunities. And the States, one has to remember that Harry Crook, who founded this business, learned all about direct selling in the United States, and he has, when he took the company public, a few of his shareholder friends and relations were there. And somebody wrote and sent me a clipping from a United States newspaper about a company selling cleaning products which was operating in a slightly different way. It was called multi-level marketing. Nobody had heard about it in 1969 here. And it looked interesting, so I got on a plane, went over to Massachusetts. I signed up as a distributor with this company, just to find out how the process worked. Then I was interested, I felt a bit guilty about that, so I rang the company up and said, look, I've been over here for a few weeks finding out how you're operating. And they said, oh, come and see us. And it was very hospitable with them. I'm sure you can imagine who this company is, but they were they were very welcoming. They told me exactly how it was operating. They said, one day we're going, in the near future, we're going to be coming to Europe, but we haven't got any plans to do so immediately. So I went back to Bristol, made the changes that were necessary, and copied a fair number of ideas, but with one big difference, and I'll explain this in a minute. I introduced a small catalogue, because in the early days, kleeneze brush salespeople just took around a big bag full of samples. They had a price list, but a pretty scanty catalogue. So it seemed essential, if it's to make the whole business easier, to have a catalogue. And so kleeneze became the UK's first multi-level networking company. Long before the Americans had come to Europe and before the idea had become accepted. And I spent years thereafter introducing the concept and promoting it. Also became the first member, because I'd by this time become chairman of the UK DSA, it became the first multi-level member of a direct selling association in Europe. Now, you might be interested to know that there were a few challenges in making those changes, and it was, and I was talking to Jamie about this earlier this morning, in the first few years, getting that change over to a networking concept did take a lot of time, because it was predominantly in the old days a business focused on men with good selling skills, and they loved it. And frankly, they thought the idea of using catalogues was for wimps. If you're going to be a proper salesman, you really knock on the door, take a step back, and go into a sales pitch. And getting those people to get the idea of, well, first of all, dropping territories, then encouraging about the benefits of building their own downlines and sponsoring and building them. It took a long, long time for that message to get across. But it did in the end. And then, of course, kleeneze has rushed ahead electrically. And so much so that it gave me huge, well, it's not just once, twice recently, I've been explaining the way direct selling operates nowadays, and I said, well, of course, most companies now operate on a networking basis, and twice people have said, oh, you mean like kleeneze? Now, I think that's great. That was hugely satisfying to me, and my congratulations to you all for getting that message across, that you are the definitive distributor of our networking. Now let me add a word about, because I'm running a bit out of time.